City of Lawrence Common Council, the meeting is now called to order. It's a special meeting regarding the budget. Today is Monday, October 21st, and it is 6:30 p.m. Can we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and prayer? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I pray, Lord, a special blessing on this evening. I pray, Lord, that you will help us with discernment and wisdom. I also pray a special blessing on our first responders, our public safety officials, Lord, that as they go and they serve the needs of the community and their constituents, I pray, Lord, that you will provide a safety blanket over each and every one of them. I ask that we leave tonight, that we remember that the words of our mouth and the meditation of our heart always be acceptable in your sight. In your name, amen.
Amen. All right.
Okay, we have a quorum. Next is unfinished business, proposal number 7, 2019.
Proposal number 7, 2019, introduced by Councilors Chevlots and Giles, a proposal for an ordinance for appropriations and tax rates for the 2020 budget year.
Okay, can I have just Controller Fenwick to come forward, please? Now, I've asked Controller Fenwick we've seen the presentation at least twice before, so I've asked Controller Fenwick just to do a quick, high-level overview for us, and then we will take any questions or comments from council members. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Just on a high level, we're pleased to have presented our 4th consecutive balanced budget, which is probably a record for the city of Lawrence. Our main operating fund is the general fund, which we fund about 70% of public safety out of that fund. The key takeaway for the general fund for 2020, we started in 2015 with an operating reserve of $1.5 million. We're projecting that will be $7.1 million at the end of this year. That's a significant increase in the city's savings account, which is to be used for emergency purposes, et cetera.
So just a point of clarification here for us, Controller Fenwick, since our last meeting. I want to make sure that it's clear the difference between the operating reserve and surplus.
A surplus are funds that are returned at the end of the year in a budget cycle. This operating reserve is the city's savings account, or in other words, some people refer to it as a rainy day fund. That fund is to be used for one-time expenditures. You could not sustain ongoing cost with the operating reserve.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
By way of comparison, we set a goal in 2016 to build that reserve up to 10% of budgeted expenditures. With 2020's budget, it exceeds 20%. So we did release some one-time funds from that reserve, again, to be used for one-time expenditures. And by way of example, the state of Indiana's reserve is 13.3%. So we're still extremely healthy financially. Some other highlights, the parks funding over the last 4 years cumulatively, we've increased that by $2.8 million. And streets, if you've been out in Lawrence the last 4 years, you've seen over $7 million reinvested into the roads. Cumulative at the street department, we've reinvested $10.3 million over 4 years. So with that.
Okay, thank you, Controller Fenwick. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions or comments of council members regarding the budget, and I'm going to open that up, and we'll just see how it goes, and we'll go from there. Any council members have any questions regarding the budget? And you know what, before I do that, let me just have Councilor Giles who is the Chair of Finance, if you just have any comments as our Finance Chair regarding the budget, you can make those at this time.
Actually, thank you. My comments are actually very brief and not of anything that of new. I do say that with this budget, it's balanced, and so that to me is the key to what we're doing. Also, too, reflected in this budget, I think to reiterate what Mr. Fenwick was saying was the advancement in our Parks Department, as well as a new addition and looking at the way that we service our garage fund and how we administer that is a significant difference for the 2020 budget, which by doing that, appropriately putting those costs on the right departments have freed up significant amount of funding for other departments that may have been a little unfairly taxed in that garage. So I'm excited about this budget, and that's why myself and Councilman Chevlot endorses so this budget.
Could I interject?
Sure.
With that garage fund, we were able to, by actually allocating the cost to each department as they use the garage, by doing that in 2020, that allowed us to add 2 additional employees at the street department. So this will be our 3rd new staff position. We added 1 for this year's budget and then 2 next year. So we have been able to do that by creating that garage fund, which obviously the street department needs additional personnel.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other council members have comments or questions regarding the budget?
I'll go.
Okay, Councilor Hall?
Controller Fenwick, thank you very much for your budget this year. My question is future looking, future facing. We have 7.1 million, you said, in the rainy day fund, if you will. A city of this size, is there an average or a goal that we should be trying to attain with that rainy day fund? How close are we? How long will it take us to get there if we're not there already?
Back in 2016, we set a goal of at least trying to get to 20%. We set the initial goal at 10%, exceeded that, raised the goal to 15. Our ultimate goal was 20%. A city of our size, we need to have 20% in that reserve. If you have 20% in that reserve, you no longer need to borrow throughout the year, which we had been doing up through 2017. We haven't borrowed since then, so that saved the city anywhere from $250,000 to $300,000 without having to borrow money to meet payroll until property taxes come in June and December. Now that we're at that 20%, we can then invest that money and earn interest. So that net swing has been about easily $500,000 to the positive to the general fund. Our goal was 20%. We will exceed that at the end of this year, hence releasing some of those funds for one-time expenditures for next year while bringing it slightly down, but slightly above the 20%.
So it's set, the 7.1 million should be about where we're at. So we're pretty good there.
Yes.
Is what I'm saying, is what I'm hearing. And with the interest that's derived from that 7.1, we should be able to fund possibly more. Does it have to be allocated at certain places, or can we put it into the general fund to fund more FTEs on the police department or fire or equipment for the fire department, or how does that get dispersed going forward?
It is included as a revenue source for 2020 into the general fund. So those funds for next year have been allocated to a variety of what you've just hit on. So yes, that was a new revenue source to the general fund for the last 2 years. Obviously, we do have a bit of a changing interest rate environment right now. So that was, we tried to be conservative with that number. But that number plus, again, the $250,000 to $300,000 that we actually had to spend out of the general fund to pay the interest on the interim borrowing is an additional amount of money that has also been reallocated within the general fund.
But do you think we should go, if we've hit the 7 million now, do you think we should strive for 25% in the future, or should we maintain our 20% heading? And
We need to maintain and not go below the 20%. And part of that is you get diminishing returns. Part of your higher reserves factor into your bond rating. So if you set 20%, we're at A+, we're due to have a meeting. In my opinion, we're due for an upgrade. If we said we're gonna set 30% so we can, let's say, get to AA+, the diminishing return is we don't save that much money borrowing from a AA to a AA+, so it's not worth having that extra cash because we don't earn enough interest on it. I think that 20% number is right where we need to be and not fall below it.
And this, forgive me, this is a roundabout way of me trying to figure out how in the future we can look to increase police salaries and fire salaries and different public service salaries that we need to make Lawrence one of those destination places to come work. So
Sure.
In my mind, I'm just kind of going through, we need more than 7 million. Is 7 million where we need to be? Is the interest, how do we continue to grow more instead of just the confined interest that we're going to be at the 20%? So, and I don't need a dissertation on the budget tonight.
Sure.
But in my head, that's the steps I'm taking.
So don't we need additional revenue sources outside of the reserve, in addition to the reserve?
Absolutely, yeah. I would not recommend drawing the reserve down to then pay a salary increase because that's a one-time, you could fund that for a year, but you want to be able to sustain it, obviously in perpetuity, but for a long time, and you wouldn't be able to do that just by drawing down the reserve to pay for that.
Sure.
So yeah, we're constantly looking for additional sources of revenue.
I think we've done an outstanding job as a community. The administration's done an outstanding job. You've done an outstanding job. Councilor Jones and Chevlot have done great, but we still have work to do. And what is the direction in going forward to create that work? I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other counselors?
Madam President, I'm sorry,
Counselor Chevlot?
Real
then
brief
Counselor
question.
Wells.
I didn't take the opportunity in a budget meeting to ask this, but have you been given any direction from the assessor's office with respect to appeals and what that might impact with respect to projected revenues from property tax? Because I understand the appeals are up.
I've not been given anything specifically on appeals. I do know last year, based on real estate sales, that the forecast was another record year in terms of sales, which then can have an impact on assessments and ultimate tax revenue. And so my takeaway from that meeting was not only was 2019 going to be a pretty good year, leaving appeals aside, for revenue growth, but 2020 and potentially 21 as well, just given the timing of assessments. So that, coupled with the at least strong economy, has also boosted the income tax receipts. So those two together, have been a very big positive for Lawrence and all communities in Indiana by and large.
Okay, that's good to know, because several years ago, probably 6 years ago or so, there was actually a clawback that the city had to reimburse to the assessor's office because the appeals processes, they over-distributed money, and so they had to give it back to the taxpayer, and so the city was left having to.
Well, and we've always tended to try to be on the very conservative end of our forecast. And if you remember last year, the state gives us the income tax forecast, I want to say in June. And so I've always kind of tended to even be a little more conservative than that and take what we had somewhere in between what we were getting in the current year versus their forecast. Thankfully, last year, even though they gave a forecast in June for Marion County, they had to revise it in September. They revised it down, but it was still up. But some other taxing entities took the June forecast, put it in the budget. Now they were forced to make some adjustments because it was revised down, which we didn't have to do that.
Thank you.
Yes, Counselor.
yes, once again, I'd like to parrot the other counselors in congratulating on a balanced budget, and that's definitely good news. My constituents have asked me a number of questions in regard to the budget. I think I got a pretty good idea what some of the answers are. Like the road and streets, the money you said we spent, what, 7 million last year, I think you said?
Cumulative over the last 4 years.
Or the last
on
4
streets,
years?
Yes.
Okay. What's in the budget now, that basically is designated by the administration is the one that sets that. There's not any set money for any one area, any one district, or it's just the money in the fund and it goes wherever the administration deems necessary?
Not necessarily. We have applied for a community crossings grant every year, and in order to apply for that grant, you have to have a asset management plan in place. That asset management plan does not take into account, I want to give all of the paving to this district or that district. It literally scores the roads, and they will award matching funds based on the scoring of those roads. So if we tried to target a particular area, we may not get those matching funds. So we wanted to leverage as much money as we could. So we literally just follow the asset management plan, pick the 4 roads that are scored the worst, fill out the application and hope we get an award, which thankfully we have. And that's how the roads are determined, by the asset management plan, which says, you know, next year, these are your 5 worst roads that need to be paved. It doesn't take into account any other particulars other than the condition of that road.
I know in my district, the citizens out there, we get, and Jim does a wonderful job as far as patching the holes or filling the holes, or unfortunately, that's most of the time just a temporary fix. There hasn't been any real extensive repairs of the streets in as long as I can remember.
There are numerous projects that are being done right now in stages in that area that will include water main replacements, and when those are done, because of that, those roads will also be repaved. So I would disagree with the comment that there hasn't been a lot of attention to the roads there. It may not be done yet, but it's in the process.
Okay, well, that's, the process doesn't do it now. I mean, that's what people are seeing now. And, if what you said is something that I can pass along to them, that's great. Because I know that they're all concerned to see the streets to be in better shape than they are. But, and the other concern that I have in the budget, and it's the same as I said last year in the budget, is it just seems like we spend a lot of money on things, a lot of money on new cars, vehicles,
When you say new cars, what new cars?
police cars.
And they don't need new police cars? Have you seen the condition of the fleet 4 years ago? They're our first responders. I mean, I would want them to be in a reliable car that's going to get to a site. And I don't know if you could say that 4 years ago.
Well, I agree. I think they need to have the best vehicles we can put forth. I just, like the SUVs, we bought, a half a dozen of those. I got a lot of complaints from my constituents about those. And like I said, I'm not going to try to nitpick the budget.
Well, I mean, to me, that sounds like a nitpick. So what, if you're going to buy an SUV for police, the decision was made that the maintenance costs on the Chargers and the sedans were such that after a couple of years, you're putting way more maintenance into those than if you buy an SUV. That might be a little bit more now. The maintenance costs are less, and there's actually resale value to those. So the police department and the city net come out ahead with those SUVs versus the old way of buying the Chargers and some of those sedans. That's why the SUVs were purchased.
Yeah, I remember it. All right, well, thank you.
Any other counselors? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
Madam President, I'll make a motion to adopt.
Motion, Counselor Chevlot.
I'll second that, please.
Second, Counselor Giles. Any discussion? All in favor, by show of hands, to pass the budget? 6 counselors. Opposed? Counselor Wells? The budget passes. We're adjourned.